Hi, I'm Jazmin, and this is Not Another PD. It's for helping professionals who are tired of theoretical training that doesn't translate to the work you actually do. Here, we talk boundaries, leadership, systems, and how to protect your well-being while doing complex work every day. I'm so glad you're here. Episode 32. This is another solo episode, and I wanted to start with a little bit of a personal anecdote or a personal story. And don't worry, I'll make it relevant. When I was growing up, I was growing up in a single parent household led by a single mother. And what I saw was a mother who is incredibly hardworking. I don't really remember her taking sick leave if she was unwell from memory. I do remember, though, one morning my mother was feeling really unwell and she was driving us to school and then she was heading off to work. And my mum was feeling so unwell that she was driving with the window fully down because the fresh air was perhaps comforting, perhaps if she needed to be sick, it was available to her. I'm not really sure. But my mother was clearly visibly unwell, and I was, I think, lower primary school age at this time, so probably 5 or 6, maybe 7, between 5 to 7 years old. And I still remember this now, a mother who was pushing herself to get to work, even though she was medically unwell to do so and really should have been at home. And it's situations like this that we don't question at the time. We just think, oh, okay, well, it's just another day. We're going, I'm off to school, parent or carers going off to work, and we don't really think and don't really challenge any other way of looking at the world or any different way of doing things. And it's not, I guess my situation isn't unique. I've spoken to, supported, mentored, supervised, I don't know, probably at least 50 helping professionals over the years, potentially more. I lost count. And these stories from when they were growing up, how their parents or carers worked, the ways that they worked, their work ethic. So, this desire to keep working, never take a break, never stop going, don't ever take a day off because you'll be letting people down, or people will think less of you, your employer will think less of you if you take a day off. These are things that were very common. I hear very often, and not just in the helping professions, but from speaking to our colleagues in other sectors, this is what they saw growing up. Their parents, grandparents, aunties, uncle, carers, this is what they saw. This is how we all saw our families of origin working. And I wanted to start us off with a really basic definition of work ethic. And I was having a look online. There's a website called Peninsula Group Limited who've said that work ethic is a set of values, beliefs, and principles that guide an individual's approach to work, which I think explains that really succinctly. And our own personal values around work, we may think they're our own unique personal values that are really meaningful to us, that we've essentially created these values around work. But if you actually reflect and look a little bit deeper, a little bit further back, then we will actually see that our own values around work, these didn't just happen coincidentally as soon as we finished university and graduated, whether we're a social worker, a counselor, a psychologist, OT, whatever our qualification is, we sometimes like to think that we went to university, we did our placements, we graduated, we got our first graduate position, we're now working in the sector, and we may identify that we have an exceptional work ethic, we're such a hard worker, and that's comes from within. It's really personal and unique to ourselves. But I encourage you to think a little bit about your earlier experiences of what you witnessed when you're growing up around those adults around you and what they role modeled about work and work ethic. And I'm also going to invite you to think about a question which may be a little bit challenging for some, but I'd like you to also think about, as this episode is unfolding, think about, where did you actually learn how to work the way that you do with your amazing work ethic? I know you all have an amazing work ethic. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing a profession in which you're helping other people. You'd be doing something much differently, I'm sure, much different to what you're doing. But also, I also will challenge you to think about, is there any ways of working that I'm currently engaged in that are no longer serving me? Or are there ways of working that I was role modeled when I was younger that are no longer serving me? And this is the question that I will ask the helping professionals that I support, just to challenge their existing ways, ways of thinking and ways of viewing work. So we're going to be talking about some specific examples, both in my own personal lived experience, but also what I've seen in the professionals that I work with. But starting from our early exposure, so what did you see growing up? Who was it that you witnessed, those adults in your life that were in the workforce? Did you see, for example, a mum who was constantly frazzled, who was working full-time hours despite the fact that she had 4 young children at home and never really took a day off, just always rushing around? And that essentially became my idea of what being a working parent was. Because when you're exposed to something repeatedly, then that becomes normalized for you. It wasn't something that, say, my mother consciously said, when you have children one day, Jazz, this is how you'll be, stressed and frazzled and racing here and racing there. It wasn't like my mum said that this is how you'll be. It was more unconscious than that. I didn't see her ever loving the work that she was doing in any of the different jobs. And my mum had various different roles over the years, but I also never saw my mum loving what she did and seeing that passion for the kind of work that she did as well. I was like, my older daughter was one of the first children to be dropped off at childcare in the morning. It was still dark. Then I would race off to the office. I would, do my hours. Then I would leave, be stuck in traffic. That would make me very frazzled. I'm sure you can relate. And then when I did the childcare pickup, she was again one of the last children to leave. We'd get home, it was again dark. We didn't have any daylight hours during the week to ever connect to, and I just felt that I was always frazzled. But then for me, that was normalized. It was like, okay, well, I saw that in my mum. I saw someone who didn't take a break. A standard 9 to 5 work day isn't a 9 to 5 work day. When you factor in getting yourself ready, if you do have children that you're caring for, getting them ready, then allowing a lot of extra time for traffic, because we know that the traffic is getting worse and worse. So we've got that element, then traffic on either side, the daily commute to work, the daily commute home, then all the other responsibilities that comes with with life. So needing to prepare dinner, lunches, just getting everything ready. A 9 to 5 work day or 9 to 5 Monday to Friday work week isn't really so. For me, it was more like a 5 a.m. till 10 p.m. workday during the week, 5 days a week. And that's what it was like. And if you also have children that you need to drop off at childcare or before school care, even, then for them, they don't have that traditional education day of like a 9 till 3 or whatever that looks like. Their days are much longer as well. But then that I never questioned initially, at least, that way of working or that work ethic, that the only way of working is a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I wouldn't have even questioned that there's other ways of working. There's flexible work arrangements. There's a hybrid, work from home, work from the office setup. Because I didn't challenge the status quo. And sometimes that's the thing. If we don't know a different way of working, we haven't been exposed to a different way of working, then we don't tend to challenge the status quo, right? Those traditional hours or those traditional ways of working, we wouldn't tend to challenge them when it becomes when those ways of working become normalized. And I'm someone who I've done a lot of my own work around values. And I also work with a lot of helping professionals around what are their values. So, what are their core values that bring them into the work that they do as helping professionals? And there's a really good values checklist by Brene Brown that I will also link to in the show notes. And this is an activity that sometimes I do with new clients who work with me. I do it with myself regularly, but it's got a list of values, and you can then identify some of your core values and see if they're also aligned with your way of working, your work ethic. So I encourage you to do that values bit of a checklist self-assessment if you haven't already, if we haven't done for a while. Our values is something that we should be regularly coming back to. And some of the common values that I see a lot in helping professionals that's linked to the work ethic are that sense of responsibility, reliability, commitment, loyalty, not letting other people down. And I would definitely say that these are such positive values, that these are, if you identify as having these values, then these are precious values. And these values are often highly reinforced in helping professions, because it can mean that and often does mean that you go above and beyond. You may be the person who doesn't take a sick day, doesn't self advocate for your needs in the workplace, such as your need for a flexible work arrangement if you're a working parent, as I am. There's an example I would like to give around a helping professional that I've worked with. And I have changed some of the details just to ensure the privacy of this amazing helping professional. And we're going to call this helping professional James. So, James is a social worker, and his mum was a nurse. So his mum never took any sick leave. She didn't take any time off during school holidays. So James was either in holiday program or with his grandparents. So he also didn't see a parent actually prioritizing time with their children over school holidays. And he also saw his mum regularly experience burnout. So for him, burnout was normalized in the helping or caring or healthcare professionals in which his mum was also working in. He just saw that as almost a rite of passage, that if you work in a service to other profession, then you're going to have burnout. So a lot of the values around work and where James's amazing work ethic came from, they were a lot of values that he actually absorbed or inherited from his mum. And the main ones, when we unpacked it further together in a session, were commitment, perseverance, and responsibility. So when James entered social work, his profession, he already had some of these presumptions or these ideas of work ethic that he'd already inherited from his mum, the nurse, to just push through. Don't expect support from colleagues, managers, the system. Just don't expect much. Just be grateful to even have a job. And James's mum would regularly say to him growing up, when she'd come home and really burnt out, highly frazzled, she'd say, "You know what, son? At least I have a job. That's the main thing. You just have a job. You don't have to love it. You don't have to love every minute of it, but you just need to have a job. That's the main thing." And James, like his mum, was very caring, so very much drawn to the professions that they're in because of that desire to help other people. But then on the other side, they both also had this understanding that, well, you're lucky to even have a job. So, like, don't rock the boat. Don't dare take any time off because that could jeopardize your employment. And a lot of the work then that I did with James was supporting him to actually conceptualize where his values around work, where they came from, what beliefs that he has around work, such as, burnout is normalized, what's no longer serving him, and what are some amazing values that his mum did teach him around work, such as a value to help and support other people. What are amazing values that are definitely serving him, that motivate him to keep doing the work, but then also on the other hand, what's no longer serving him. Because burnout should never be normalized in the work that we do. Yes, we may have had an experience of burnout. We may have multiple experiences. I've had my own experience of burnout, at least one experience. It's so unpleasant, but we should never enter any profession such as social work, nursing, counseling, any service to other profession with almost considering burnout as a rite of passage, that it's just going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Like, let's kind of reframe that. Let's progress beyond that. And I had, for all of my childhood, from primary school age through to high school, even into early adulthood, I experienced debilitating migraines. And the doctors thought that they were linked to my sinuses, but it was never fully understood. But that was just a part of my reality, that I would be, bedridden for up to 3 days at a time, and until I just got better. And so that was, that became a normal part of my existence. I just somehow managed. And because I had that experience of migraines, and then I also had, as I mentioned at this earlier on in the episode, I had a mum. I was raised by a single parent, in which I never saw my mum really take a day off. She just kept, plowing through. And in my early days of being pregnant with my first child, this is before I entered the social work sector. I was actually working in the financial services sector. So initially I worked in banking, and then I worked in superannuation. So like a lot of us, we didn't always start our profession where we are now. We could have started somewhere else, and then we've pivoted. So I definitely pivoted into social work. And anyway, so I was working in the financial services industry. I was early pregnancy. And because I had experienced migraines for such a long time, I could detect all of those early signs. So normally when I detected those early warning signs, I would take whatever medication I needed to take and then rest. And this morning, as I was taking the tram to the office, I started feeling those familiar symptoms of the migraine coming on. And what I should have done, and in hindsight, if this happened now, 100% this is what I would do. I should have turned around, went home, or firstly called my employer and said, "I'm unwell," then turned around and went home and rested. I didn't do that. I ignored the symptoms, which were getting worse and worse the closer I got to the office. And then I entered the office anyway and put all my stuff down and ended up being like physically sick at work. My employer, they were amazing. They sent me home in a taxi at their expense. I Even though I was getting so many signals from my body that I was unwell, I needed to stop, I needed to take care of myself. My work ethic and that desire to please, that desire to be seen as the good employee overrode my own sickness and my own feeling of being unwell. And to add to the the complication of the matter, I was also in early pregnancy. So I also wasn't even sure what that would look like. How would my career look when I added a baby into the mix? But then I remembered what I saw from my mum in the way that she kept working, never took a day off, was always frazzled. So I was also thinking, well, it didn't really, my own feelings, my own health didn't really come into it because that desire to get to work, to be the good employee just overtook all of my rational thinking. It's something that I do regret to this day. And I think, well, why didn't I just turn around and go home? Because the end result was the same. I was unwell to work anyway. So I don't even think I was at work for more than 10 minutes, maybe maximum 20 minutes. I essentially got to work and spent the 10 minutes I was there in the bathrooms anyway. So it wasn't like I was a productive employee that day. I didn't get any work done. I wasn't capable of doing that. So the end result was the same, in which I ended up needing to take a sick day anyway. I do share this story with helping professionals that I work with because this is not a unique situation or unique story to me. I'm not any more self-aware or self-insightful or insightful as anyone else, initially at least. But the thing that I've done a little bit differently is I now start to question these things. And it took me a long time to start questioning these things. And I guess now I'm two children down the track, and I can definitely say I do things a lot differently now. But it just sometimes takes that one catalyst, that one incident that makes you actually rethink how you're doing things, right? And I speak a lot to helping professionals and leaders as well in organizations around some of these psychosocial hazards in the workplace. So we may know them as psychological hazards, but they're commonly known as psychosocial hazards. And some psychosocial hazards that also become normalized because these are psychosocial hazards that generations previous, the adults in our lives that we saw experiencing that these also became commonplace. And some examples of these are the excessive workload, also the lack of flexible work arrangements in maybe our parents or grandparents generations. We definitely saw a lack of flexible work arrangements. There were also some, and even like if you think about compulsory superannuation hasn't always been compulsory in Australia either. And the fact that burnout is normalized as well, and was normalized in like James's situation, in which his shift worker nurse mother was constantly burnt out. But these things at the time didn't seem like hazards, so they weren't identified as workplace hazards back then. They were just normalized. So when we've now all entered the workplace as helping professionals with embodying some of these myths, like I should be able to cope with this workload stress, like my parents did, my grandparents did. I don't need support. I'll just push through. I can't let anyone down. And with these kind of myths, we'll call them myths, then when we're placed in highly emotionally demanding roles in the helping professions, then that risk of us experiencing psychosocial hazards in the workplace, or how we're impacted by psychosocial hazards, then that increases. And I'll go back to the values as well. So, a lot of our values around our work and our work ethic, the values itself are never a problem. Some examples of some of them are achievement, accountability, growth, reliability, recognition, pride, personal fulfillment. There's a huge list. I won't read all of them now, but I'm sure you'll be able to soon identify your core values. None of those values are the problem here, but it's how we're actually embodying those values in a work setting. If we look at the example of like the value being commitment, how that value can be expressed is you stay too long past your finishing time in the workplace. I've been guilty of that. The value of responsibility, that can actually be expressed as carrying absolutely everything. So if you're a leader, not delegating anything to your team who are more than capable. Loyalty. So loyalty is an amazing value. I guess the shadow side of that value, how it could be expressed in the workplace, is that not actually leaving roles. So not leaving a role that it may be have been an amazingly supportive role, but perhaps you're wanting to, grow professionally, you're wanting to try out a different field of practice, but your sense of really strict loyalty to that one employer may keep you stuck with that one employer and not progressing. Another example is self-discipline. So if one of your values is self-discipline, if you're someone who, like me, goes to the gym a lot and has a really strong desire to keep physically fit and physically active, so you consider yourself self-disciplined, how this may be expressed in the workplace in a not so helpful way could be ignoring your own limits to actually stop, take a break, like take a sick day from time to time if you need to. And it can be hard to change the way we embody some of these values in the workplace, because these values are often intertwined with our own identity, our own self-esteem, our feelings of self-worth, and people are often proud of these values. And as I said, these values are amazing values when they're like I guess in moderation in the workplace, right? I guess there's room to take any values to the extreme, because we've often built our careers around our values. So it's not about, I would never ask anyone to change their values, because these are so personal, they're unique, they're uniquely yours, right? And I'm not in any way implying that you should be removing any values or changing them. I'm just asking you to reflect on how these values may be expressed in the workplace and if they're always serving you. And you can still be amazingly committed, amazingly loyal, self-disciplined in a way that's also still serving you. So when I say serving you, serving your career progression, your own physical, your emotional, your spiritual health, it needs to also serve you. And the work that you do needs to have a benefit to you. And a benefit is not just collecting a salary at the end of the fortnight or the week. That's not enough of a benefit. Your work also should never negatively impact your own physical, emotional, or spiritual health. So it's just a hard truth there as well. And if you have experienced burnout, then you'll know that that takes a significant toll on all those different elements of your health. I know it definitely did for me. Let's look at work ethic versus self neglect. So, a strong work ethic can eventually mean that you're neglecting yourself, where you over functioning gets rewarded. And I've definitely seen in workplaces where the staff who always agree to all of the overtime requests get rewarded by being promoted, and staff members like me who actually did put in some boundaries around work hours, a work life balance, get left behind. Let's shift that, because if we're a leader, if we as leaders are only rewarding staff that overgive to their professional role, they're burnt out themselves and they don't actually have a thriving life outside of work, then what are you role modeling to your team? That overworking, overgiving should be rewarded, and that you should give absolutely everything to your role and leave nothing for yourself and your loved ones. So let's challenge this. This conversation is hopefully the starting point, because what gets rewarded in the workplace in terms of work ethic isn't always healthy, and it's often not best practice at all. And if you're a leader, I also encourage you, what ways of working are you role modeling to your team? Are you role modeling never taking a sick day, never, not prioritizing your own professional learning? What are you actually prioritizing yourself as a leader? Because it's not just our staff we should be focusing on, but we need to be focusing inwardly on ourselves. And there's often a guilt we may have around rest, working when unwell, minimizing our own needs. And as I've mentioned, that these patterns often come from our earlier experiences and what's been role modeled of the adults around us, and sometimes even workplace cultures as well can definitely play an impact. But speaking of impact, there are a lot of negative impacts on not prioritizing yourself and overgiving to the work, and where self-neglect just becomes part of your story, your life. And some of those impacts are chronic stress, just feeling fatigued, actually reduced capacity in both work and in your personal life. So actually being struggling to manage the competing demands. It can also take a toll on your relationships, both personal and professional. The other side of it is, at what cost does doing that come? So at what cost to your own health, your stress levels, time with your family, overgiving to your profession and undergiving to yourself? Like, what's the cost? Because there's always a cost, right? So let's actually take a moment to redefine work ethic. Is there anything after listening to this episode that you think maybe there's a way of working for you that's a little bit more sustainable? And what does sustainable work look like for you? Because good workers, and I'll do inverted commas, so good workers should have limits. They should take leave when they need to. They should actually protect their own well-being. We should never lose sight of our core values. Keep reflecting on them. I encourage you to have a look and do that Brene Brown values self-assessment. You can keep your core values and be really clear on them, but you can slightly tweak how they show up for you at work. So you can still be committed, responsible, reliable, all of those things without the burnout. And burnout, no thanks. And let's say that aloud if you're listening to this in the car or when no one's around you. Just say, burnout, no thanks. And some other prompts as well, just to have a bit of a think. If you're someone who likes to do journaling, get out your journal. What did I learn about work and work ethic growing up and from those adults around me? What was normalized? What values do I hold around work and work ethic? And is there any of those values or how those values are showing up that maybe is no longer serving me? So I do hope this discussion has inspired you. If you would like a little bit of more support around this, I welcome you to connect with me. You can also join one of my upcoming group supervision programs, and you can also book in for a one-on-one session with me as well. And it would be great to be able to support you with this and hear how your way of working may not be sustainable, may not be aligned with your values anymore. Thank you for joining me on Not Another PD. If this episode was helpful and you'd like to find out more, you'll find ways to work with me in the show notes. And if there's a topic you would like covered or someone you think should be on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Remember, clear boundaries don't just protect our clients, they protect us too.